Welcome aboard Chronic Hoosier. How are you, sir?
Glad to be back. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, there's no hiding behind the elephant in the room, which, except for this elephant's not going anywhere. That is, almost said Mike Davis. Who? Mike Whitson in the Indiana basketball program, just not having a season like the fans were expecting. And I'm sure maybe the players were not expecting, but it got bad, and it was really never not bad. It was just not as bad sometimes, but it kind of stayed, lukewarm at best at times.
Yeah, it's been a rough one. I think it's been rough for everybody involved. And it's looking back. I remember the dismay when a lot of the national prognosticators came out and were making their predictions for the league, and Indiana was kind of consensus bottom half. Somewhere in that middle tier. And a lot of folks, myself included, thought that was probably a little overly pessimistic considering the pieces that Indiana had added and what it was returning. And I remember as we were talking about those prospects, the one thing that really was kind of the wild card in all this was, the chemistry, the synergy of the group. And part of that was, can they shoot? As things have played out, we have learned that they're not a shooting team in any stretch of the imagination, and for whatever reason, the chemistry just didn't quite gel with this group, and the result is a disappointing season that's going to find not only the Hoosiers outside looking in, probably when it comes to all postseason for that matter. But now we're back in coaching talk, which was totally not on anyone's radar at the start of the season, which tells you maybe it's a little bit abrupt, but also, maybe a little bit of a reflection of just how far things had fallen so quickly that now all of a sudden this is very much a conversation that's dominating a lot of the circles covering IU basketball right now. And it's unfortunate on a number of levels, not the least of which because we just got done doing this a couple years ago, and it's like Groundhog Day again. Here we're back again having these same conversations, and love it or hate it, it's hard to argue otherwise that it's just not productive from a program standpoint.
No, and the Indiana has all the resources needed to not be in this situation. NIL is not a problem for Indiana. Tradition, the facilities, all of that stuff, in-state talent, everything is right there for Indiana is a sleeping giant, but they're sleeping. They're sleepwalking, maybe, but it's all right there, and that is I understand why Indiana fans are not happy. Who would be is with this product, but much less with the product after having all of those resources at your disposal.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations where I feel like it's we kind of lose sight of the forest for the trees. Or maybe it's the other way around, honestly, because everybody's looking at the broader state of the program and saying just how far off they are from the mark. And at the end of the day, Woody missed on a couple of guards, and you can pick your guard. We've had several of them that a lot of fans, a lot of people within the program thought we had a great shot of landing, and ultimately it just didn't happen for whatever reason. But at the end of the day, the backcourt is deficient. They're just not good enough, plain and simple. And as we see in stark contrast right now, it's a guards game, and without a stronger backcourt, you're going to struggle to compete. And Indiana is struggling pretty mightily right now. And this is probably not what fans want to hear, but it's not like this is an indictment of the entire program. You've got NBA talent on the or on the roster, in Khalil Ware. And along those lines, I don't really think it's a stretch to imagine or envision a world where Renew matriculates to the league, and possibly Mbako too, if he can figure out how to play defense and establish some consistency. I think a lot of the the eulogies about his career have been extraordinarily premature, considering his age and what's been asked of him. But it's not that far of a step to go from his season to Gabe Cupps. These are guys that came in young and were thrust into roles where they had to contribute at a high level and frequently. And unfortunately, they weren't always up to the task. And I think it's unfortunate that you put all those expectations on true freshmen. But welcome to modern college basketball. Ask John Calipari how he feels about that, or Duke for that matter. I mean, teams all across the country take young lineups, take lineups that aren't familiar with each other, recently constructed, and they got to make it work. And Indiana got bit by a multitude of those factors this season. But I think at the end of the day, probably none more so than they just couldn't shoot the basketball, and the guards just weren't good enough, offense or defense for that matter, to really put them in a position to compete. So it's wild that we're where we are now, but we're very squarely here. When you put together the streak that IU has in the second half of the season this year, you have 4 wins since the new year. Not one win against what's likely to be a tournament team. We'll see how Morehead State does in their conference, but there's a good chance Indiana could finish the season without a single win against an NCAA tournament team. So they've really been picking off the low hanging fruit, and we've seen a team that looked like they could play with the best of them, like we saw against Kansas. And all too often you've seen a team that's going to get swept by Northwestern, Nebraska, and Penn State. And if you're Indiana, like you mentioned, with the resources available, that's just unacceptable. No matter the root cause, no matter what got you there, injuries and everything else, you got to be better than that. And they're not. And I think the big thing for me going forward is not just what do you do, but like how do you expect to get different results unless you make more fundamental changes? There's a lot of talk that we're going to change the style of basketball now that Trace Jackson Davis had left. Unfortunately, we're back in the same lane because your two best players happen to be post players. So you're going to run a post dominated offense. And I know Woody catches a lot of slack for that, but what are you supposed to do? Ignore those guys and just take a bunch of long 2-pointers or brick a bunch of threes, because that's about the only other thing they're going to do with the basketball right now. So uh, we're at the part of the season that I absolutely hate. One of the reasons I kind of stepped back from Twitter for the last couple of years, because these situations get rather unpleasant. It's just a very, very angry and sometimes toxic pool when fans are frustrated. And I don't want to dismiss any of those frustrations, because they're clearly justified. You pay good money to go watch IU basketball. Hell, you pay good money just to keep enough subscriptions that you can watch it on television anymore. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's a game, and Indiana's just not playing the game very well right now. So it's going to be a fascinating offseason. I think one of the paradoxes here is, if they don't make a move, has the well become so poisoned that you've effectively cut off the likelihood of infusing the talent that you're going to need to get out of this hole? And I think that's one thing that kind of gets lost in this, is and all the reactions and the overreactions, if you will, how much harder that can make fixing things down the line. So it's fascinating to see how the administration handles it, how the staff handles it, and ultimately how the next Hoosiers respond, because he's going to have to add some. There's no doubt about it. Where it comes from and whether or not it's going to be an upgrade remains to be seen. But the situation that you currently find the program in isn't really conducive to attracting, the best talent coming in when everybody knows the house is on fire right now.
That was my next question. Exactly. So going into this off season, when they're going to have to, we don't even know what all they're going to have to replace. We know what they will have to replace, but there's a lot of unknowns. And last year we knew what they needed to replace. Kind of didn't go far enough, obviously. But there seems to have been a disconnect between matching personnel, game planning, adjustments. There just seems to be so many things that are just not there for this program right now. And I say that because you can look at so many different statistics. And is there one that they do well in besides uh, overall field goal percentage? Because they're obviously not shooting the free throws very well, the 3-pointer, not defending the 3-pointer, offensive rebounding. It's just, there's just not a lot of, there's not an area where they're really excelling.
No, and I don't want to get too simplistic with it, but Woody said it himself, um, uh, 2 games ago, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Indiana's just not competing. They're just not. They're not competing at a high enough level. I think it was after the Nebraska game, and it started on defense, but you see it reflected in all the statistical categories. I mean, the field goal percentage is probably an anomaly just due to the type of offense they run. When everything's coming at the rim, you better be hitting at a high clip. But outside of that, there's really not a lot that this team does particularly well right now. Short of maybe getting to the free throw line, but when you shoot free throws as poorly as this team does, that's not a winning strategy. Unfortunately, I don't care if you're getting to the line on 3 out of every 4 trips down the floor, you're just not converting enough, especially when you look at the 3-point disparity that Indiana's been faced with. So I don't know what the answer is, but I you take a step further back if you really want to do a post-mortem here. Why did X fall so far from the mark? Why was Trey Galloway's regression as stark as what it has been this year? Um, you know, Best thing I can tell, and I said this in reply to a tweet, I think again after the Nebraska game. Typically, whenever you see a lack of progress as just profound as this season has been for the program, typically it's a result of not having a team where everybody's pulling together in the same direction. And there's no inside info behind that. That's just typically the way teams work. That's the way leadership works. Is you've got to get everybody moving in the same direction with some common goals. And it's you know ipso facto, I think it's safe to say that that's not been the case this year because, quite honestly, they're just not making any progress, and they have not for the better part of the season. Because let's be frank, a lot of the issues that you see, against Penn State, against Nebraska, any of the last 4 losses, we saw those in November. These aren't recently sprung up issues. These have been systemic for some time now, particularly when you look at Indiana's inability to shoot the basketball. Um, and unfortunately, it's just something that's gone without being addressed, and there's really no way around that. So I would assume that you've got to do something different, otherwise you're just going to continue to get the same results.